My topic today is the spiritual health and well-being of the minister. I need to say that in many ways this is one of the most important topics that you will hear during your ministry training. The reason I say that is because unfortunately most situations actually find us where many ministers actually after a number of years no longer are able to continue in ministry. I'm not saying this as a brag, but the reality is that out of my Bible college class, I am the only one that's still in ministry. And the truth is, I wasn't the brightest, I wasn't the best preacher, I wasn't the most anointed, but along the way, for many different reasons, my colleagues have stopped ministering. Now for some, this is a seasonal thing. God leads you one direction and God leads you another direction. But unfortunately, the reality is that for many of them, they wanted to have they had a sense of a lifelong call and they wanted to have a lifelong ministry, but something along the way caused them to be derailed. So I want to talk to you about that today, and I want to talk to you and start with this first subject, looking at the subject of stress. In Matthew chapter 11, verse 28, it says, Jesus said this, "Come to me, all you who labour and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Now, I've spent many years as a pastor preaching this verse, and I must tell you that my observation of ministry is that it's not easy per se. But I think what Jesus was meaning when he talked about this verse, he talked about the yoke being easy. It's probably better translated that the yoke fits well. And when an oxen was put into a yoke, they would also call a carpenter to shape the yoke so that it would fit the ox perfectly. They would shave off a little bit of the yoke here and there to make sure that there weren't high points that were going to cause rubs or bruises or blisters or calluses upon the yoke, upon the neck of the ox. And the truth is that that's what I believe this verse, it means. That ministry is meant to be made for us. Ministry is created so that we are able to do it our way, and God actually wants to work with us in that. And if we're not doing it the right way, it will cause calluses, it will cause blisters, and it will cause a burden that is not either easy or light. So as we think about this today, I want you to think about your own ministry and make this as personal as possible, because if you miss this opportunity to think about this now, you may actually be putting yourself in danger for the future. So I want to look at two things over the next four subjects that we deal with. I want to look at self-care and I want to look at spiritual health. I want to look at the spiritual health of the minister and the impact of self-care, which is looking at the impact of stress on your body, the need for rest, and learning how you recharge the best. And I also want to look at spiritual health, knowing how one best connects with God, how you have self-reflection, how you understand the interconnected nature of health, or a holistic approach to health. And hopefully this will be useful for you. So the first part of this discussion is the issue of stress. Now, stress seems to be something that people talk a lot about. It's amazing how often you'll hear people say, "Oh, I need a bit of stress leave," or "I'm feeling a bit stressed today." And I think stress has become a very, very common understanding amongst us all. And if you like, it's a little bit trendy. It's probably a little bit the thing to say, "Oh yeah, I'm stressed." But I really want us to dig into what stress is. And I want to start by giving you an instantaneous stress test. Now, it's only very, very short and very, very simple. And the reality is, if on the next slide I show you, you see anything, there's actually two dolphins in the next picture. And if you see anything different to two dolphins, then it's quite likely that you are stressed. And so you're ready? Look very closely. Here they are. Can you see anything apart from two dolphins? Well, of course, I'm joking with you. Everyone saw a cow and a dolphin, I hope. If you saw two dolphins, maybe you are really stressed. But the reality is that the point I'm making is that everyone feels stress. And everyone experiences stress at different parts of their life. So what is it? What is stress? A definition of stress is It's a state of mental or emotional strain or tension resulting from adverse or demanding circumstances. Now, all of us can go through various demanding circumstances. We can all face amazing challenges in our life, and cumulatively, that emotion, that sense, that physical reaction we have to it can be encapsulated in the single word of stress. Hans Sloane discovered stress or wrote about stress in 1935 as a syndrome occurring in laboratory rats. He would put rats in a maze, and he would then change the doors, and he would limit their water. He would do various things to cause occurrences of anguish and demanding circumstances upon these rats. And he could see that the rats not only had a mental reaction to this, they had a physical reaction. They had a bodily reaction to it. And in fact, it was not until 1948 that, following World War II, that stress was used in an acceptable medical context. So up until 1948, there was no such thing as stress for a person to feel. Now, obviously, people felt stress, but it wasn't defined. So it's less than 100 years since stress has been understood as even a medical condition. Up until that point, stress was only ever used to describe the strength of a bridge and the breaking strength in terms of engineering terms. So something happened, and people started to recognise that stress was actually a problem. I want to look now at a little bit of a history of stress, and I want to look at specifically stress in relation to battlefield stress. Now, I'm an army chaplain, and so I'm a little bit excited and interested in military history. And so as I looked back in history and explored the concepts of how people have experienced stress, I want to tell you that even though stress was only defined in 1948 as a problem, it's been happening for thousands of years. In fact, if we go back to the 5th century BC, we have the historian Herodotus, who tells of a Spartan commander who excused soldiers, though they'd been proven in bravery, they had experienced a situation where they were out of heart, was his words. They were unwilling to encounter the danger. Herodotus also mentions a soldier called the Trembler, who hanged himself. He took his own life by suicide, and it's clear that this was more than likely a reaction of post-traumatic stress disorder all the way back in the 5th century BC. In the 16th century, we have the Great Fire of London, Samuel Pepys. He describes the experience. Over a third of the city of London burnt to the ground, thousands of people killed. And he noticed after this that fellow Londoners experienced what appeared to be classic PTSD symptoms of sleeplessness and anxiety, an ongoing problem following the stress that they had experienced. In the American Civil War in the 1860s, we have thousands of Union Civil War combat veterans who were hospitalised with a condition that they referred to as nostalgia. It was a despondent, depressed state that resulted from severe homesickness intensified by the stresses of military life. In 1866, the New York Times reported a new disorder called railway spine, where passengers who have experienced a train crash, because during the 1860s it was the time the railways started to cross the United States, and everyone was travelling, and unfortunately, because of the amount of new travel and the perfecting the railways, many train crashes happened, many derailments. And he said this New York reporter said, a passenger gets out of the accident with his body unbruised and his mind unconscious of any disorder beyond the general weakness and confusion, which then sets down vaguely to a shock to the system, while his friend charitably attributed to excessive fright. So even an incident like that, reported from the 1860s, we see that stress has always been here with us. In 1914, we start to really see the influence and the understanding of stress come to pass. More than 300 British soldiers, many suffering from shell shock, are actually executed for being cowards. In 2006, the United Kingdom grants these soldiers posthumous pardons and says that they made a mistake. they were actually just stressed. In 1943, US Army Lieutenant General George Patton, visiting wounded soldiers in a hospital in Sicily, actually spoke to one of the soldiers about his injuries, and the soldier responded, "Oh, it's my nerves." And Patton actually is recorded as slapping him across the face and calling him a coward, when actually he was just under stress and needed a little bit of a different treatment. In 1978, 8 years after it was first proposed and after being stopped several times through Congress, Senator Cranston's bill creating outreach centres for Vietnam veterans suffering from psychological problems related to their service was passed by Congress. In 1989, Congress established the National Centre for Post-Traumatic Stress Disorder, and the Department of Veterans Affairs actually looks after that. It spread among 7 academic centres for excellence around the country, and this unit was charged with promoting research and better education about PTSD. In 2008, there was a landmark study which estimated that 300,000 of the 1.64 million US service members deployed in Iraq and Afghanistan would suffer from PTSD or depression, and that far too few are getting effective treatment. My point is that stress has always been a thing. Stress will always be a thing, and that you are probably experiencing stress in your life now, and you will definitely experience it into the future. The question is, and my final thought for this section, is how are you dealing with your stress? So as we continue to explore the subject of stress, I want us to try to get a handle on understanding stress. Now, the reality is you're never going to fully understand it, but if you can pick up on a few pointers as we go through this discussion, it might actually help you to recognise that stress is going to be experienced differently by different people. My brother and I are very different people. We're 4 years apart. We have a very different personality type. I respond to stress differently than he does. I find some things stressful, he doesn't. He finds other things stressful that I would not. And so what you need to understand is that you will respond to stress in a certain way according to your personality. But there are some general rules that we can actually explore. So the truth is that stress is actually essential and a normal part of life. If we didn't have stress, we probably wouldn't get out of bed in the morning. If we didn't have the stress of looking after our family, we wouldn't strive for excellence. If we didn't want to do well for God, we wouldn't desire to pray. And all of those things have a certain element of stress. And what we need to understand is stress is a bit like a bell curve. Stress is good up to a certain point, but then it can become counterproductive, and our production in the good stress period goes up because we actually improve, because stress excites us and moves us forward. But if we go too far with our stress, it actually starts to overwhelm us and our performance drops down. Human beings are one integrated package. You can't just separate our mind from our emotions. You can't separate the joy that you have in life with the difficulty you're having. They all tend to meld together. They mold together, and so we end up being a bit of a product of everything that's going on. Our relationships, our work life, our ministry, all gets rolled into one. So stress in any area actually is stress. So if you're stressed in your relationship, that means you're going to be stressed at work, even though you are doing really well at work and you might not have any problems at work. Or if you're stressed at work, it's going to actually put stress upon your relationship. If you're stressed in ministry, it's going to put stress on every part of your life. So you need to recognize that stress can't just be discounted as, oh, I'm only stressed about this. No, you're actually experiencing stress in a powerful way. Now, even good things can produce stress. In the last few years, I've seen 3 of my children get married, and they're quite stressful events. They're great stress, but they're stress nonetheless. Good things can produce stress. A new job can produce stress. A new house, a new opportunity, a new baby in the house can certainly produce stress. Anything we experience can actually have a level of stress in its life. Stress will produce one of two responses, or three responses really. It's flight, fight, or freeze. When we have come up against a scenario where we are endangered, we will either fight it or we'll flee from it. And the reality is that this is what stress actually does in our life. So when we are experiencing a stressful situation, we either arc up and fight back, or we will pull away from it as a natural response. Now, sometimes neither of those is the right response, and we actually have to be able to counter that with a different sort of response. But it's really interesting to understand that those actual chemicals are happening in our body, and the responses is actually a chemical reaction that's taking place. So the body prepares chemically for physical action even when the emergency isn't a physical danger. And the general adaptation syndrome or automatic nervous system kicks in, and instantly and automatically we have a response to what's going on in our life. And this includes the secretion of our good friend adrenaline, which can be a positive thing, but also it can actually be a negative thing as well. Unused or unaddressed, this can cause long-term health problems. So if we are constantly living under stress, that's when we start to see some of the problems that we have already talked about in the previous session. When people live under stress for long periods of time, like say in a refugee camp, you start to see them physically impacted. Even though they might have enough food, they might have enough shelter, they might have everything they need to survive according to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, they're struggling because they're overwhelmed with stress. And that's not how we want to find ourselves. Some people say though, but look, I like living on the edge. I like doing things wild. I like taking risks. I want to challenge you that a lot of people approach ministry like that. They say, but I'm okay. I'm strong. I'm called of God. I've got something going for me. And that's great that you have. But I want to tell you, if you live on the edge and you like living on the edge, it will actually cost you. I'm not trying to be negative here. I'm a very positive person. I'm someone who has experienced 30 years plus of ministry, and I intend to experience another 30 years of ministry ahead of me. I'm looking forward to that. But I've learned that I need to be very careful to look after myself because I'm the best resource I have at the moment. What happens is that when adrenaline kicks in, at the same time, less essential activities such as digestion are curtailed. So when you're actually fully adrenalized, if you like, your digestion will almost stop. So you'll put food in, but you won't digest it properly. You'll lack getting the nourishment. You can imagine what happens over time. In a period of stress, your saliva and your mucus dry up, increasing the size of the air passages to the lungs because your body's getting ready to run. And so you're fighting and you're ready to fly out of the circumstance. And so this is actually a physical reaction to stress. The body's natural painkillers, endorphins, are secreted, and the surface blood vessels are constricted to reduce bleeding in case of injury. Your body is an amazing miracle that God created, and when you put it under stress, it has natural reactions. The spleen releases more red blood cells to help carry oxygen, all set up so that you can run away from that which is stressing you. But if you don't run away from it and you stay under that level of stress for an extended period of time, you're setting yourself up for some serious problems. Now, most of these physiological changes result from activities of two systems controlled by the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus talks to the pituitary gland, the master gland of the body, which excretes the adrenaline. And so we end up with this complex diagram here, and it's a picture of what's going on in your body. So you've got the parasympathetic responses and the sympathetic responses. All of this happens around the issue of stress. So your pupils constricted, your salivation is stimulated, your heart is inhibited, your breathing is constricted, your digestive system is inhibited. uninhibited. All of this happens around the issue of stress. And when we actually experience it, we are overwhelmed and our bodies feel like they're losing it. And that's exactly what's happening because there is so many things going on. The truth is, you are not in charge. The autonomic nervous system releases hormones, including adrenaline and norepinephrine, which perpetuates a state of physical arousal. So you feel aroused and you continue to feel aroused. The endocrine system or adrenal cortical system releases corticotrophin, which signals the pituitary gland to secrete adrenocorticotropic hormones, the body's major stress hormone. And this stimulates the adrenal glands in turn, resulting in the release of cortisol and around 30 other hormones. So you're not in charge, people. There's a whole lot going on. So when stress comes, all of this happens automatically. And the lesson here is not to learn all those incredibly long terms and understand them all, but to recognise you are not in charge, and so you can't expect that you will have control over what's going on. In the short term, this is a response because it helps the body fight or flee from the threat. And eventually the hormones signal the hippocampus, which regulates your emotion, to turn this off and to turn this physiological cascade off when the threat has passed. And we end up in a loop system where the stressor or immediate fight or flight is possible and useful, and we get used to it. And if we live under stress constantly, we will automatically move into these things very, very quickly, and we get into a pattern of behaviour that is actually quite destructive. But the reality is that when a stressor is chronic, or we cannot fight or flee it, the chronic physiological arousal that results can be severely damaging to the body, mind, and emotion. And there are consequences of stress. Now, what I'd love to do right now is to stop and talk to you about what you think the consequences of stress are. And it might even be worth, right at this moment, just pausing the video for a moment and making a list of what you think the consequences of stress. And think about when you were last stressed and what happened when you were stressed. Now, once you've done that, let's explore the list that I'm going to give you of some of the consequences of stress. The first one is physical illness. Things like ulcers, linked to the immune system, asthma, headaches, coronary heart disease, high blood pressure, and the impairment of the immune system have all been linked directly to stress. Cohen gave us an interesting definition and application. He said, stress is the body's perception of tension in response to actual or anticipated difficulties. These might be demands or threats or major life events. Any unfamiliar environment presents various types of stress. So this includes biological, such as illness or great exertion, environmental, such as smog, chaotic traffic or people, and life situations such as life and death in the family, a job transfer, or a feeling of overwhelming disorientation in strange surroundings known as culture shock. We can also experience stressful mental activities such as figuring out language nuances or being hit with overwhelming images and sensations. Maybe in the last few months you've been hit with overwhelming images or sensations as you've looked at what's going on around the world that you live in. People who are not under pressure to achieve some goal, but come with the frame of mind to learn and understand, actually seem to be able to tolerate and even enjoy the chaos. But people who are under pressure and trying to receive a goal or achieve a goal find themselves living a life of stress. So, question for you as we come towards a close of this section. How can you manage your stress? Because one of the key illustrations I want to give you for your ministry is that you are going to be stressed, but you need to learn how to manage your stress. The truth is, and the first line in our slide here is a little bit annoying. It says, avoid stressful situations. Well, it'd be great if we could do that. But I know that I can not always avoid stressful situations, but I can look for chances, look for opportunities to get out of them. But I can avoid extremes. I can avoid extremes in my reactions. I can avoid being incredibly angry or incredibly sad about things that maybe I don't need to feel as much about. Setting realistic goals is important. And recognizing, as I've asked you already, to think about how stress particularly affects you, you can even manage that. If you know that you get really, really stressed by Monday, 9:30 in the morning because of this, this, and this, maybe you can change one of those or two of those thises so that you're not as stressed by 9 o'clock on a Monday morning. Change how you see the situation or change how you react to it. These are mental, cognitive activities that you can take that can make a difference. You can set priorities for yourself. You can take control of the situation. You can maybe discover a new relaxation technique. Or you can figure out what's most important for you. My final slide gives you a few simple things. There's hundreds of these types of slides around, but if stress is at the centre of your life, healthy eating will help reduce it. Now, you can't eat your way out of stress. You can't sleep your way out of stress. Family time won't necessarily fix stress, and exercise won't necessarily fix stress. But when they are all taken together, when they are all in right proportions, these four things can help you. And so I just ask you the question, are you exercising? How's your sleep? Discipline. What is your family life and balance doing? What is your eating doing? If all of those are in good order, then you are much better prepared to deal with your stress. As we go from this session, I want to encourage you to stop for a moment. Don't just turn the video and say, well, that's done. Actually think about what we've talked about. Do a bit of an inventory of yourself and ask yourself the question, how well am I dealing with my stress? And how long can I last if I don't make any changes? I want to talk to you about having a life of success. That can sound a little bit self-serving and self-focused, but I want to challenge you that what we really want to do is we want to be successful for God, and we want to be successful in our calling, and we want to actually see those things which we believe God's called us to come to pass in our lives. And if we don't deal with our stress, if we don't deal with those challenges that are all surrounding us, we will actually never actually be successful. We need to actually understand that there are possibilities and there are difficulties in our lives. But the reality is the possibilities are in the difficulties if we actually live according to the purpose of God. Yeah, we need to find a stress-free zone and try to live in a stressful situation. The Lord actually challenges us to come aside and rest with Him, to allow Him to be the hiding place that we can retreat to. And sometimes in the middle of the challenges of where we find ourselves, we actually have to have a hiding place or a way of getting away from the stress. In the Bible, we have some great scriptures that I'm just going to list for you. You can look them up and explore them a little deeper than I touch on them here. But in Philippians 4 verse 6, it says that we should let the peace of God rule in our heart. We actually have to allow it to do it. We can't just expect it to do it. We can't just expect God to reach in and put peace into our heart. We have to allow the peace of God to rule in the midst of turmoil. In the book of Luke 12:25, Jesus actually said, do you know this, that you can't add even a handspan to your life or your height by adding worry to your life? You can't add any time to your life by worrying. You can't do anything. Worry doesn't actually achieve anything. And if we worry about our life, then we're actually just wasting our time. 1 Peter 5 verse 6 challenges us to humble ourselves before God. And these things, letting peace of God rule and not worrying and humbling ourselves, are actually key indicators and key benefits to actually having an effective life. 1 Thessalonians 5 verse 16 says, rejoice always, in everything give thanks. It's good remembrance, it's a good word to remember, because sometimes we just find ourselves in negative arguments and negative connotations all the time, focusing on the bad things that are going on in our life. And if you're going to be a successful person, if you're going to have a successful life, you need to focus on the positives that are surrounding you. Psalm 55 verse 22, the Lord challenges us to cast our care upon the Lord. Truth is, he is more than able to handle our problems. He is large enough to meet every need we have. And we are missing an opportunity if we don't actually cast our cares upon him. This really comes down to knowing the promises of God for you. I know you know this, but knowing your Bible is one of the best things the Christian can do. Knowing your Bible is one of the most effective things the minister can do to protect their spiritual life. Knowing the Bible is one of the things that is going to protect you in making sure there's longevity in your life completely. Know the promises God has for you. Things like the Lord promising that he will never leave us or forsake us. We find this in Deuteronomy and in the book of Joshua and in the book of Hebrews. So important. The Lord said it 3 times to us. He said it and said it and said it, because that knowledge sometimes is the one thing that's going to keep you going. I'll tell you, in the dark day, when you are challenged in the midst of your ministry, it is going to be beautiful to remember what I'm saying to you today, which is that the Lord will never leave you and he will not forsake you. The Lord also made this promise, that no one who has left father or mother for his sake will actually lose out. He said that. He said that whatever you sacrifice, you don't lose. And I think that's brilliant, because there are people who are listening to this today who are going to have to make sacrifices in your life. At times you might give up an opportunity for a new house. You might give up opportunity for spending time with your family. I've had situations in my life where I've been deployed overseas with the armed forces and I've been away from my family for months. I want to tell you, I haven't lost out because of that. My family hasn't lost out because of that. Why? Because God promises us a life of success. But we actually have to subscribe to allow him to do that in our life. So here's my challenge for you. We need to learn some strategies for managing the stress. In the previous sessions, I've talked about stress. I spent the last session talking about some of the complexities and how we are really not in control, but we can be in control of our management of stress. The first thing we need to do is we need to keep a continuous check on our stress levels. We need to have some sort of methodology of working out, am I stressed or am I not stressed? Naivety or lack of information is not actually good enough. You need to recognize, yes, I am stressed. Yes, this is a stressful situation, and yes, I need to work to actually change the circumstances. God gave you a ministry, but in a way, he has left you as the manager of that ministry. You need to sometimes recognize that your overreactions are caused by stress rather than the quality of your spirituality. Now, this can be tremendously liberating, because we can get very, very guilty because of how we feel like we're responding. We say, look, why am I so angry at that person? Oh, it's because I'm an unspiritual person. No, it could be because you're simply in a stressful situation. And you need to recognize that it's okay. One of the things I use all the time, and I practice with some of my friends, is a thing called ventilative confession. That's when you get into a room safe by yourself with someone you really trust, and you can actually just let loose and say what you need to say. Because I'll tell you, you don't want to do that to your boss. You don't want to necessarily do that to your wife or your spouse. You want to be careful what you say, especially when situations are stressful. For starters, it could be worth doing a personal stress test each year. There's some good ones on the net. If you just Google personal stress test. There'll be an inventory that you can go through to ask a number of questions. It will ask you what's happening in your life. It'll give you a value and it'll explain what those values mean. But even just having something that will just check up on how you are. You check your car each year, hopefully. You go to the doctors each year. Maybe you could just check your stress as well. Another thing you can do is you can work hard on things that cause stress while they're at manageable proportions. So it's good to deal with things early rather than leaving things till the last minute. This is what I'm saying. If we wait until we're totally stressed and having almost a breakdown of stress-related condition, then it's probably too late to actually deal with it effectively. But if we deal with it as it's emerging, if we deal with it portion by portion, then we are much more likely to be able to deal with it effectively. I use this term, and it's living life in day-tight compartments. So, if you've got a Tupperware container and you put the lid down, you know that the food's going to stay safe in it for a day or so. In a way, I want you to think about your life in that way. Deal with the problems of today. Don't worry about the problems of tomorrow. That's a scriptural principle, but it's also a very, very practical one as well. I have a lot of appointments coming up in the next 2 weeks. If I thought about all those appointments and all the people I've got to talk to and all the emails I've got to write, the reports I've got to submit, the people that could speak to me, the stresses that I might experience, the times I've got to preach, I start finding my heart rate, even as I've just gone through that list, has started to rise. But if I think of today, what have I got to do today? Have I got that in control? I can actually be quite calm, relaxed, and just cognizant of the fact that yes, I've got a challenging, stressful life, but it's okay. And in a way, as I saw last night at my Connect group, on the fridge of the person we were having that Connect group at, it said, God's got this. That's a great reminder that God's actually with us and has life in control if we are actually focusing on Him. So key here is really to pay attention to the spiritual tone of your life. So I ask you, how are you doing? Not in just a meaningless, nebulous way, but how are you really doing? What is the spiritual tone of your life? Are you close to God? Are you praying? Are you finding points of joy in your life? Are you finding relaxation and refreshment in your knowledge that God's with you? Or are you feeling distant? Are you feeling like you're in a wilderness? Are you feeling like the heavens are brassy? Are you feeling like no one's answering your prayers? What's going on for you? Now, we have seasons, both of those. But understanding those seasons and understanding the times and seasons is actually a sign of a spiritual man or a woman. And we need to pay attention to those things. And understanding those things will help us manage our stress. On the slides, we have a picture of some gauges. I use these gauges as a self-evaluation tool. I've got 4 gauges that I think about, and I'll just ask you maybe to pause the video in a minute and ask yourself the question of how you are going in these gauges. So if 0 is bad and 1600 is good in terms of your life, where are you at? Where is your emotional life at the moment? Is it positive? Is it really punching and you're feeling great about things? You're finding joy and life and enjoyment in what you're doing? Or are you finding yourself teary and frustrated and angry? And if you were, you'd be on the low side on the emotional gauge. How's your physical gauge going? And I know none of us may be exactly at the peak of physical condition we're talking about, but I'm not talking about that so much as, are you well? Are you feeling connected? And within your limits that you have as an individual, how is your physical world going? How's your spiritual world going? And usually people think about those 3 gauges, but they very rarely have the 4th gauge, which is empathy. And empathy is a key gauge for you as a minister of the gospel, as a pastoral carer or as a chaplain or whoever you are, because this talks to how you feel about other people. If your empathy gauge is very high, you will be very engaged with people. You will feel for people. You will care about what they feel. But if your empathy gauge is very low, you will not care about them. You will not even be interested, and in fact, you might start to stop even loving people. And this is one of the critical things that happens to people in ministry, is they start off with very, very full gauges. All of these gauges are full. But over time, these gauges drop off. And if they don't have a methodology of refreshing those tanks become empty and eventually become bankrupt. And I'll tell you, if you bankrupt any one of these gauges, you're done in ministry. And this is the frightening thing. And I've seen far too many times people bankrupt themselves in one of these areas and end up without an opportunity to go forward. Another thing we have to avoid when we're managing our stress is we need to manage and avoid adrenaline addiction. Now, adrenaline's a great thing. It inspires us to do crazy things like go bungee jumping. But often you'll hear people refer to themselves as adrenaline junkies. And often those people will migrate from bungee jumping to base jumping. And then they'll migrate from base jumping to something even more dangerous in order to gain an adrenaline rush. And unfortunately, often they will end up taking their life by accident because they're just pushing the barriers all the time. Now, I'm not suggesting that that's going to happen to you in ministry, but a lot of ministers actually enjoy adrenaline so much that they seek it out and they get stuck in some patterns of behaviour that are not helpful. To avoid adrenaline addiction, you'll need to learn how to recognise when you're running on adrenaline and learn how to turn it off. Now, there's certain things you will do that will cause adrenaline to run. I'm recording this lecture today. There's a certain amount of adrenaline involved in that, and at the end of it, I will feel a response to that. But I need to be careful that I don't run all day on adrenaline, otherwise I'm setting myself up for a failure. Work out what works for you. Such things as sleep, reading, a cup of tea, a read before bed, they're all helpful in their place. Making this into a habit can actually do you some real good and help your body do life well. During the day, you actually need to find a relaxation technique that can be used easily to turn off adrenaline rush when it's needed. Something as simple as just stopping and taking 5 deep breaths could be all you need to do to just turn off that adrenaline rush, get a little bit more of a handle on what's really going on, and move forward. Okay, so we need to avoid adrenaline addiction. As a drug, we can get addicted to adrenaline and we can go through withdrawal symptoms when it's cut off. It's possible that we'll get headaches and irritableness that come out of our adrenaline rush. The point is, it's still possible to go to sleep with adrenaline still pumping, and the adrenaline will literally burn up the tissues of your body, especially muscle and the heart in particular. In Arch Hart's book on adrenaline and stress, we find some very useful thinking for some additional depth if you'd like to read into it. And he makes the following observations. He said that there's a difference between the rush of adrenaline that can help us in an emergency and the long-term use of adrenaline, which can be so damaging. He actually says that 5 minutes of operating on adrenaline uses the equivalent reserves for 1 hour's normal work. So 1 hour extra late night running on adrenaline is going to cost you the equivalent of 12 hours of reserves. Now you think about it, if you live in a stressful period for an extended period, you could be setting yourself up for a complete deficit of restoration in your life. Have you ever thought about the question of whether you're responding to the adrenaline or whether you're responding to the anointing? Now, I'm kicking a bit of a sacred cow there, but the reality is that often what people call the anointing is actually just a feeling of excitement. When we serve God in our type of services, we are probably seeing a combination of both of these things at work, and that's fine. But a very long slowdown cycle at the end of a service is a good indicator that you are probably operating under adrenaline. If you feel like it takes a long time to relax after a service, then I would challenge you that it might not just be the anointing, it might actually be that you've been running on significant levels of adrenaline. Sometimes the end of the adrenaline cycle is dangerous. In fact, you don't feel normal drowsiness at the end of an adrenaline cycle once it turns off. Suddenly you find yourself asleep. Now, unfortunately, this is seen often at 100 kilometres an hour when people are driving a vehicle. They've been pushing themselves, and then suddenly they just fall asleep. The cause of many holiday accidents is actually adrenaline overload and the relaxation that comes from just the fact that the body says, okay, I'm going to take a bit of a rest right now. So how else can we manage stress? Good thing is to not make unnecessary decisions. Try to standardise your life, especially at stressful times, as much as possible. Stressful times are not a good time to make decisions if you can avoid it. Now, sometimes we can't avoid it. We have to make the decisions. But where you can, avoid making decisions. Indecision is an emotional fuel leak. So while I'm saying don't make unnecessary decisions, we need to be careful we don't stay in indecision. We need to make decisions as soon as possible. And the truth is, a decision that is made and re-evaluated takes a lot less effort on you than not making a decision at all. And so if you have to make a decision, but don't be frightened to change that decision if you have to. In fact, most life decisions are choices. It's only occasionally that we have enough information to generally make a full decision and we have to stick to it. So don't get too stressed about making decisions. It's important to have God's leading in your decision making. And the following list is a useful strategy based on some scriptural principles. So give the whole of your life to God, the Bible says. Then you go ahead and make your plans, because the whole is His at your choice. And it's easy for Him to direct your decision making. So basically focus on Him, give everything to God, and then let Him actually help you as you make your plans. You don't have to wait for everything to be a word from Him. Matthew 11, we've already touched on in our first session. And Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who labour and are heavy laden, and I'll give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." I want to encourage you to keep life to routines. When you're pushing limits of overload and pressure, keep as much of your life as stable as possible, so that changes in patterns are not giving you extra stress points. Maybe get some good practical books and journals that understand the pressures of ministry and have helpful articles to help you out. And recognise and use the therapeutic effect of speaking in tongues and prayer in the Spirit. God is the great burden bearer. Develop habits of giving things over to God. The truth is, you will have stress in your life. And the truth is, the choice is yours to manage it. How you manage it is up to you. But if you don't think about it, you will not manage it well. So let's be people who manage our stress and actually recognise that God can actually help us deal with some of the things like adrenaline that are pushing us along this road. Thank you. I want to finish our discussion on the spiritual health of the minister by looking at the subject of how to survive in oppression that's renowned for burnout, the subject of self-care. Now, if we were together, I would be looking at exploring some of the things you do to refresh yourself, and I'm going to encourage you throughout this video to actually do that and to stop and to really contemplate what works for you. But I want to revisit the fact that out of a large group of people who start in ministry, the reality is that a very small minority will continue in that ministry for the whole of their life. And the realisation of that is that a lot of people burn out because of a whole lot of different reasons. So what I want to explore is, what is this concept of burnout and how does it impact upon individuals? So stress is one thing, and we've talked about stress, but burnout is something far, far more. Stress, if you like, is a picture of a car broken down on the side of the road. Burnout is a car on the side of the road that has no wheels, has been firebombed, and is no way is ever going to get back to being used. Burnout is a psychological condition that results from chronic stress related to working with people. It has three central dimensions. The first is emotional exhaustion. It's where a person feels emotionally drained by their work. And I'm not talking about on Friday afternoon feeling tired. I'm talking about total exhaustion and inability to continue because you just feel you've got nothing left. The second aspect is depersonalisation. It's a response of cynicism and withdrawal from people. So people, you've all met people in this situation. I remember the very first job that I had coming out of university. I worked for a woman. I was working in a HR department, and the HR controller, the personnel manager of the organisation told me this. She hired me and I was working in her office, and she said, "You know, the problem is, Ralph, I hate people." She got to the point in a job which was focused on HR and people that she just got to hate them. She just disliked them completely. She was the worst person I'd ever worked for in my life because she was actually suffering from burnout and depersonalisation. The third thing that is a central dimension of burnout is this low sense of personal accomplishment. It's where I've been doing something for so long and feeling like I've achieved nothing. And this is particularly dangerous for pastors because sometimes it's really hard to tell whether we've been successful or unsuccessful based on a given Sunday or based on a month of Sundays that we've had. And sometimes people feel really struggling in this area. So as we continue, let's just think about what this means for you and I. Working in Christian ministry is stressful because it's focused on the intangible spirituality of people within a secularised society, and I'd say a progressively secularised society. How do you actually tell that you're achieving what you think you're achieving? Now, you can count numbers of people who are sitting in seats in church on a Sunday, but is that really enough to know whether we're doing a good job? You can say, well, I had a lot of likes to my Instagram post when I reposted my message on Sunday. Is that really enough to tell us whether we've got an effective ministry taking place? I want to tell you that you've got to actually get used to being unsure as to whether you're doing well or not. Because it's actually not that important whether you know whether you're doing well or not, because it's all something we're going to find out in eternity. But the reality is that we have these natural beings that struggle with some of these temptations to want to know and want to understand, and we need to learn to understand that. So consequently, clergy are at high risk of burnout. In fact, very high risk of burnout. Many burn out because of the way they're treated by churches, by the challenges of ministry, by the financial burdens of ministry, by the sacrifices of ministry, by just the relentless requirements to keep going. Many burnouts. In one case study, after 1 year, we find that graduates from a theological college experience moderate levels of distress on the scales of emotional exhaustion, personal accomplishment, but relatively low levels of depersonalisation. So what this is saying is that they still liked people, but they were just finding it challenging. They felt emotionally drained by their work, but they felt they were not doing a good job, but they still loved the ministry. Now, yeah, that was graduates after 1 year of ministry. How do you think they're going to feel after 25 years of ministry? If they are going to continually feeling emotionally drained, and if they don't feel like they're doing a good job, how long is it going to be before they experience depersonalisation and experience a full-on burnout? Now, when it comes to burnout, good news is there are some protective factors. There are some things we can have that will actually protect us from getting burnt out. The first one is extroversion. So if you are an extroverted person, you are less likely to burn out than an introverted person. Now, that's a generalisation, we need to be careful with it, but those who exhibit the personality trait of extroversion are more likely to hold on to a sense of personal accomplishment because they're just wired that way. They're with people, and as long as they're with people and as long as they're getting input from outside, they will keep going. So a lot of extroverts push out further and further and then have a massive crash. And so you might have seen people who are very extroverted and gregarious suddenly fall over and everyone's really surprised, where an introverted person will become more and more insular and people aren't quite as surprised when something goes wrong in that situation. But what's the real issue here? I think we need to ask the question is that there is something going on, and maybe it is that people are actually focusing on the outside more importantly than what's actually going on the inside. And if you are an extrovert, and I am unashamedly an extrovert, I need to be really careful that I'm not just satisfied by what's going on the outside, but I need to really focus on mature, well-considered inner world. And that's the next point. If we develop considered, mature beliefs, we will actually be less likely to burn out. If we have a more internal orientation to our world, we are less likely to burn out. Through good spiritual practice and a sense of personal competence and autonomy, during theological college and its aftermath, we will be in a better position to be protected from burnout. So what this is saying is making sure that you're actually reflecting, going into yourself and thinking about what's happening in your world, journaling and maybe exploring some of the nuances of what is happening could actually be something that could really protect you when it comes to burning out. The other thing that is really helpful is peer support groups and professional supervision. I want to tell you that you cannot underestimate the importance of having someone that you can talk to. For many years in ministry, I thought I had to do it on my own. I thought it was me and God forever, and I just had to go on and do it. But I found the joy of being able to offload and unload the problems and challenges that I was facing, and even just interact with someone else in the issue of supervision, and it became a very, very powerful part of my life. And now I see a supervisor, a professional supervisor that I debrief with every 6 weeks, and it's the best thing I can do in my ministry to keep me fresh. And if I didn't have that appointment, I would have a whole heap of stuff just building up that I would never be able to offload, and I don't know that I'd still be in ministry if it wasn't for the fact that I had a personal supervisor. And I want to encourage you to actually look at it and explore it early rather than late. I wish someone had said to me when I was in Bible college the things I'm saying to you today. I wish that I had heard someone say that I actually had to look after myself in order to be in ministry 30 years from now. And I want to say that to you today. You need to do that. It's absolutely vital. But what else can we do? Well, we can educate ourselves about the pitfalls of our world. You know, what message does the world send to you regarding work and achievement? Well, this world's really sending you some messages. Think about what it is. It's telling you that you have to keep working. If you work harder, you'll do better. And sometimes these things are not the messages that the Lord actually wants you to hear. What are some of the pitfalls of ministry? What message does the church send you regarding mission and ministry? For many pastors, the church is sending them a message that if they work harder, if they pray harder, if they preach harder, if they do all of this more, then the church will grow. I want to ask you, what's the downside of that? The downside of that is that all of our ministers are exhausted, working hard, under pressure, under adrenaline rush all the time, and are maybe not actually hearing the voice of God anymore. Ministry is not work. It's a calling. You need to work. You need to do stuff. But the reality is there's a whole lot more to it than meets the eye. And if we are only going by man's judgment, we're actually setting ourselves up for failure. We need to educate ourselves regarding the limitations of our body and the importance of self-care. How much sleep do you need? It might not be the same amount of sleep that I need. How many days can you work in a row before you need a day off? How much stress can you deal with? How many counselling sessions can you do in a day? After a few months in ministry, you should start to recognise your limitations. Your body has a limitation. Your mind has a limitation. Your spirit has a limitation. If you go above those, you're actually not practicing self-care. You're actually setting yourself up for an incredible failure. You're setting yourself up to fall over, and whose fault is that? When was the last time you spent a whole day reading a book or walking along a beach? And you might be saying, oh, Ralph, that's just irresponsible. How can you even say that? Well, I want to challenge you. If you've had a visceral reaction to that question, maybe you need to actually really ask yourself the question. When did you last do something you really enjoyed? When was the last time you just, for no reason apart from the fact that you enjoyed it, did something? And I know you might be under pressure. I know you might be studying. You might be working an extra job to get this all happening at once. But what's the point of doing all of that if you burn out and there's nothing left to give at the end of it? There's nothing more attractive in a minister of the gospel than when they've got time, when they've got margin in their life, when they've got joy in their life. And if you think you can fake that, you're having yourself on. We can put a facade on for people to see, and it might work for a while, but if you actually want to be real, it's got to be real. And we need to be honest about that. On the chart that you've got in front of you, there's it's a mathematical formula, if you like. It's a fraction. In red, we've got the top of the fraction. In green, we've got the bottom of the fraction, and the answer is what comes out of our life. Now, if you have emotional overload in your life and little reward in your life and feelings of helplessness, if that is the largest part of your equation, then what do you think the total response is going to be? What is going in is what's coming out. But if you've got emotional release, a sense of appreciation and a sense of control happening in your life, if that's more balanced, then the response is going to be balanced. So what goes in is what comes out. So I've had times in my life when I've worked out of emotional overload, and the response has been that I've got the job done, but I haven't got the job done well. I've had other times when I've worked out of the green area, the green zone, and it's been so much better. Now, there's sometimes where we're a bit red and green. There's top and bottom of the issue going on, and it's just a question for you, is it balanced in your life at the moment? You need to learn some things. And one of the things is to learn at least one relaxation technique and practice it regularly. You need to balance your life by exercising regularly. You need to get proper rest. Adrenaline arousal reduces the need for sleep, but we'll ultimately pay the penalty for it. And a lot of people tell me, I only need 5 hours sleep. And I'm a little bit like that. I can go for weeks on 5 hours sleep, but you eventually pay for it. We need to get proper rest. Don't be frightened to take some time. I used to think that if I admitted I was having a day off, people would think I was slack. But you know what I found? That when people find out that I'm actually taking a day's leave or taking some time with my family, they're excited by that because they know I work hard. No one doubts that I work hard. No one doubts that I'm called to the ministry and that I'm passionate about it. But I don't need to justify to myself or to them. And it's actually a good thing for me to rest, because when I rest, I feel rested. I know that sounds really bizarre and simple, but when I rest, I feel rested. And when I'm rested, I get revived, I get renewed, I get invigorated. I actually am ready for the next step. We do need to learn to be flexible. Life throws you curveballs all the time. Life will throw you challenges that will throw you off if you're not ready. We need to slow down at times. I tend to operate at a high speed, and I know sometimes I need to just put on the brakes and pull back a little bit to slow down and enjoy what's going on around me. Chuck Kraft said, the hurrier I go, the behinder I get, the further behind. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes when I'm just running full speed, I get fall more and more behind. But when I actually slow down and just think about it, I find out creative ways, better ways of working out what's next. We need to also learn constructive ways of dealing with our anger, because we are people who get angry. And if you don't have an outlet for that and a way of managing it, it will come out in unhelpful ways that will actually become major problems in your life. A great scripture to challenge you and get thinking about is from the Song of Solomon 2 verse 15. It says this, it says, catch the little foxes, for the little foxes spoil the vines. What it's saying is that the foxes, that you wouldn't think would be a problem in a vineyard, are the thing which causes a problem, because the foxes spoil the vines, and as the vines get spoiled, then the crop gets spoiled. So it's the little things that can get in the way. And if you're finding yourself stressed by little things, deal with the little things. Deal with them and reorganise your life so that those things don't become a problem. We need to develop the ability to be empathetic in your care of others. And we need to keep sympathy under control. Sympathy drives this feeling of guilt that we have to do something. Empathy is standing with others in the middle of the situation. You can't actually fix somebody, so you empathetically stand with them. But when you feel sympathy for them, you feel this overwhelming need to do something. And keeping it under control is actually something that will help you not burn out. Understand your own neurotic need so you can keep it out of the way of your pastoring. Some people pastor as if they're Superman or Wonder Woman. They feel like music should play and they need to suddenly fix every situation. And I'll tell you, you're setting yourself up for burnout. You can't do it. You can't fix people. The Lord can fix people if they let him. The Lord can change situations if they let him. But the reality is you can't actually do that much apart from being a good role model and pointing them to Jesus. So relax and stop trying to be so excited about yourself. Focus on your ministry, on the essentials. Being a man or a woman of God. Being connected and able to minister and bring people into the presence of God. Stay in touch with realities, what you can achieve, what you can't achieve. If you're in a small church, there's only so much you can do. You can't do everything that the big, large church can do. Stay in touch with reality. If you're one person working on a team, you can't achieve what a team down the road of 10 people can achieve. Stop beating up on yourself. Treat yourself well. Don't let your ambitions outrun the limits of your capabilities, including your time. Avoid states of helplessness by taking control and implementing a coping strategy, no matter how minor that coping strategy may be. And if you can't resolve a major conflict area in your life, leave it. And you might say, well, isn't that defeatist? No, it's not. If there's something you've tried to resolve and you can't resolve it, as long as it's not something that's ethically compromising you, just leave it. Just relax. You can't do it. You can't change it. Don't try. I'm reading the life story and sermons of Robert McShane. He had an incredible inspiration to do more for God. He was a young man who had a desire to do more for God. And unfortunately, this is the quote that he's most remembered for. It was a quote from his deathbed. He said this, God gave me a message and he gave me a horse. I've killed the horse, so now I can't deliver the message. What he's saying is that he was the horse and God gave him the message. And he overworked himself to death. He actually worked so hard, at the age of 31 years old, he had served God with insatiable fervour, and he felt that his death was premature and self-inflicted. What a terrible testimony. A sad testimony. Now, it's great that Robert's in heaven, and God's pleased with him, and he did his best, and sometimes we make mistakes, but let's learn from the mistakes of others. Don't just burn yourself out for God. Allow God to burn within you and keep burning within you. I want to see you old and ministering. That's my goal today, is to see you old and ministering. To see you in 30 years ministering, and maybe just one half of 1% of why is because someone told you, maybe that was me, to look after yourself. So what is the response when people ask, how are you doing? When people ask you how are you going, do you answer, oh, not that bad, or oh, I'm a little busy, or I'm a little stressed? Often your first reaction will be an indicator of what's going on in your life. The reality is that we are obsessed with efficiency and productivity. We have to be producing something when actually God is maybe asking us to be something rather than to do something. We are human beings, not human doings. Be aware of that. We're horrified by the thought of wasting time. What if wasting time is actually an opportunity for you to wait on God? Or just to refresh and revitalise? What if you're thinking of nothing is actually an okay thing to do? Don't be so pushed by our Protestant work ethic that we are overwhelmed by it. In working, trying to beat the clock, we walk faster, drive faster, work faster, talk faster, we live faster. And I don't think we actually improve our life. So the last thing I really want to talk to you about in this is thinking about rest and refreshment. What is rest? Can you even define it? What does it mean to rest? Rest can be described as a state of peace, contentment, serenity, stillness and calm. Gordon MacDonald says this, he differentiates rest from leisure or amusement. He tells us that rest is found beyond leisure. He notes that God commanded rest and that God was actually the first rester. He commanded us to rest. He told us to sit down. Jesus told the disciples to come aside and rest a while. It just so happened that when they got to where they were resting, the 5,000 people were sitting there and he ended up having to feed them. But the intent was there that Jesus wanted us to rest. On the screen, there's a picture of a piece of music. And it's just a personal thing, and you might not like classical music, but I particularly like this piece of music. And I've learned and trained myself to listen to this music, and it's actually become a therapeutic part of my restoration. And I can listen to this piece of music now, and it automatically lowers my heart rate because I've learned to rest listening to this piece of music. Maybe something like that is what you need. You need to develop something that gives you a quietness of heart, an awareness of who we are and who God is, an ability to let go, to not try so hard, even when we're resting, even trying to rest, an ability to enjoy leisure, nature, and things that do not relate to performance. We need to understand and explore the concept of reflection and live in a place of trust. It sounds restful, doesn't it? And my question for you is, do you have a place of rest? And if you don't, then you're actually setting yourself up for failure. 3 main words that were used in the Old Testament to describe rest are Shabbat, Nuah, and Sukkot. It means to stop and cease from work and activity. But Nuah means to settle down with no more movement, but with a sense of inner ease. And Sukkot means tranquility and the absence of inner anxiety. And putting these 3 together, it paints a rich and multifaceted picture. Rest involves something we do, something we experience, and something God gives us. We see that we must regularly cease from work and become still before God to gain a sense of tranquility and to lose the shackles of stress. God provides supernatural security and peace. They actually point out that we should not think of work versus rest, but instead of work and rest. God invented both, and virtually the same time he gave them both to man. They're meant to be a complement, not to fight against each other. A godly life is a life of rest. A godly life is a life of work. And I think this works for me really well because it helps me understand that ministry can be restful, but it's also work, and rest can be ministry. And so I'm doing work even when I'm resting, and I'm resting even when I'm working if I do it the right way. And that's why I can feel energised. You know, the people say, you know, find a job you like and you'll never work a day in your life. There's a bit of truth to that. But it's also a little bit of a bumper sticker. And it's not very realistic, because every job has something that's a bit of a pain. But hopefully the job that you've chosen in terms of ministry, the life you've chosen in terms of ministry, will give you something that actually helps you move forward in a powerful way. Despite our needs and longings, we can actually fear rest. Tan asks the question, why do we fear the very thing we long for? Perhaps we're addicted to the adrenaline rush of busyness, or perhaps we're fearful of facing our true state of being, our emptiness, our bad feelings, or our painful memories. It's easier to keep busy and to not reflect, to not come face to face with our painful inner struggles. Perhaps we define ourselves by what we produce and how we perform, using an external criteria for success to define our self-worth, and maybe that's the problem. Maybe we're more worried about what we do than who we are. And what do you think God thinks? I kind of think God thinks the opposite. He's more interested in who I am, not what I did. When I get to heaven, he won't say, hey, what did you do? He will actually say, who were you? How did you live? How did you do? Not what did you do? Perhaps we feel that if it's up to us to make it, we feel that if we slow things down, we'll fall apart. We're afraid of losing speed, of losing ground, losing momentum, losing our lifestyle. Or we may be afraid of rest because we feel trapped in our ever-spiralling, increasing, escalating cycle of whirlwind activity and accelerated busyness. Maybe that's the problem. For many of us, it might feel hopeless. To stop and rest feels us feeling more anxious about the things we're leaving undone. And that's the reaction. We feel like that. John Ortberg says, hurry is not of the devil, hurry is the devil. So is that really true? I kind of think it might be. The speed that we live our life might actually be the problem. But surely we can just push the edge of the envelope. Surely if I push harder, it will work. Surely I'm just a high achiever and I should be working like that. Surely God's watching every moment I waste and judging me for it. Didn't Jesus run around like a headless chicken just doing everything? What about the disciples? I want to just challenge you with these last thoughts this morning. Don't all the disciples suffer exhaustion and burnout? I think they all did at different points. Maybe not burnout, but they all suffer challenges of ministry. How many disciples throughout history have died of stress or heart failure? How many should have? How many exited the ministry prior to them fulfilling the call that was upon their life? How many get beyond 7 years in ministry? Is it possible they rested? Is it possible they rested and still changed the world? So my question for you is, don't fear rest. Or do you fear rest? And if you do fear rest, what are you going to do to change the scenario? Because the truth is that God actually has a future for you. And the most important thing of all is that you are making yourself available for ministry, but you actually remain available for a long time by looking after yourself. As I finish these thoughts today for this lecture series, I just want to encourage you that God actually called you for a purpose. God's not finished with you yet. Don't finish prematurely by not looking after yourself. Make sure that you allow yourself the self-care you deserve, because God loves you enough to provide it for you if you look for it. Thanks very much. Have a great rest of your ministry, and I pray God's blessing on you.